The last time we discussed angles and distances derived from Josephus' remarks and the implication those angles and distances have on the scenarios we are facing. The scenario of the Temple Mount being either the Temple Mount or being in fact the Fortress Antonia. In this video I will discuss the consideration Herod probably had prior to his capital expenditures on his building projects in Jerusalem, and I will also discuss some calculations about the space required to harbor a legion and to harbor the governmental infrastructure to administer a Roman province somewhere in Jerusalem. Now, these three main building projects King Herod the Great had in Jerusalem were: one, the extension of Fortress Antonia, and two, the makeover of the temple, and three, his own palace. Now, one can look at it as an investment in the defense capabilities of the Roman Empire, the investment in Fortress Antonia. Herod was a vassal king, so it was one of his duties to defend the Roman Empire, in his case the east border. The other investment can be considered as to be an investment in public relations with the Jews. The Jews were his subjects, so there is an incentive to do that. And the third investment, or not so much an investment, is the consumer spending on his own palace. Now, when we are talking about Herod the Great, in the Bible he comes across as brutal and ruthless, and this image is definitely corroborated by Josephus, but another side of Herod is being portrayed as well. He must have been very smart and talented, and he did spend his money well. In fact, reading Josephus, I was reminded of the words from Jesus recommending his disciples to use money in order to make friends. Well, that was Herod in the flesh, so to speak. It had been a theme throughout his life to make friends by spending money on them. And his goals were rather simple, straightforward in fact. To stay friends with the emperor, to be as popular as possible with his subjects, and to live a peaceful life in his palace. I can't say he reached all his objectives, but he must have been rather successful given the fact that he died of old age. He was in his 70s, after being king for a number of decades. Anyway, this guy was very thoughtful about money he was spending, and he was very aware of the importance of his priorities and very sharp in his dealings with risks. But he did have a problem, and that was the fact that he had become a close friend with Mark Antony, a big shot in Rome. But unfortunately for Herod, Mark Antony became an adversary of Octavius, which turned into a civil war in the Roman Empire, and a war that was lost by Antony. So I think, no, I do not think, it is written by Josephus that Herod was very much aware that he had a big problem in Rome, because he basically gambled on the wrong guy. So Herod must have thought that he was on the watch list of Caesar August, because Octavius turned into Caesar August, and Herod must have thought that he was on the watch list of Octavius, and he probably was. And that is, of course, a very dangerous list to be on, the watch list of the emperor. Now, Herod did his best, You can read that in Josephus as well. He supported the Hellenization of Judea and the integration into the Roman Empire with his building projects throughout his kingdom. And then he turned his attention to Jerusalem. And the question that can be asked is, what is the politically correct sequence of projects, and what is the politically correct balance between the amount of money spent on each of these building projects? Now, the best sequence is, of course, to spend first to pay tribute to his boss, the emperor, and then to please his subjects, and then to build a palace for himself. And that was exactly what he did. Concerning the proportions on what he should spend on each of these projects, the proper balance would be to spend something like this. This. To spend half on the empire of his capital expenditures, 20% on the temple, on his subjects basically, and 10% on his own palace. That is the way to stay friends with the emperor, if you do that like this. And then you create this configuration of Jerusalem. The wrong balance to spend your money on is like this, that you spend 70% on the temple and 20% on your own palace and 10% on the defense of the empire. Because if you look at it, I think that the palace of Herod is at least twice as expensive as Fortress Antonia, because that is just a simple and functional and solid building, while the palace of Herod was full of marble and things like that. And if you think about the amount of money that can be spent on a temple, when you want to make that this vast area beautiful with a lot of marble and gold and enormous lengths of cloisters and things like that, then that is very expensive. So this balance fits this picture, while this balance fits this picture. Now my next contention will be that this building here, which is the Roman fortress, allegedly, where Herod spent 10% of his budget on, allegedly, is not fit for purpose. The facility where the Romans were located in Jerusalem needed to have enough space for a legion, and that is at least 6 cohorts, which include cavalry and their horses, and an auxiliary unit with storage for engines of war, support units, a courthouse, and a palace for the Roman governor and his wife and his staff, warehouses to keep stocks, prisons, place to sleep, to eat, to be, maybe even to exercise, kitchens, space to facilitate transportation, so basically roads to get the basic necessities in and out, food and wood and water in and waste out. A legion itself is already about something like 5,000 soldiers, and with the Roman procurator and his administrative staff, the total will be close to 6,000, if not more, with at least 300 horses. Now the total area of this Temple Mount, so-called Temple Mount, is 142,340 square meters, and given the standard amount of space Roman legions usually required, which would be more like 150,000, it isn't even that big, this area here. So they had to use their surface area rather efficiently, or anyway not waste it, in order to have space for the Roman procurator and his entourage. The Fortress Antonia, if we look at Fortress Antonia on this location here, this footprint is about 17,000 square meter, which can be increased to 35,000 square meter if you build a 3-level building on it, and then you can cramp 2 cohorts into that, but there is no space for anything else. Now, I have also heard people doubting the presence of a Roman legion in Jerusalem, but that ain't be a very serious position to take. Josephus did not only mention the purpose of the fortress, Antonia, and I quote, I have shown you that already before, for there were always lay in this tower a Roman legion, end quote, from book number 5 of the Jewish Wars, chapter 5. But he did also mention it explicitly, the presence of visiting legions in Jerusalem several times in this book about the Jewish Antiquities. Most of the times that legions were accompanied by a visiting Roman governor. And not only Josephus is implying that, Luke, the author of Acts of the Apostle, is in fact doing the same, because he is describing an event in chapter 23 of Acts of the Apostle, and I will quote it for you. And he called unto him 2 centurions, him being the commander of the Fortress Antonia at that time, and he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Ceasarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200, at the 3rd hour of the night. And this commander, Claudius Lysias, did that to transport Paul to Caesarea to Felix. Now, at that time, the situation was very tense in Jerusalem, so it is inconceivable that this commander, what was his name again, Claudius Lysias, would send away out of Jerusalem half of his fighting capacity to perform this job in this tense situation. And that implies that the commander had at least 3 and probably 4 cohorts at his disposal. And those simply didn't fit into this, but they would in this. Now again, the conclusion which we can draw here is that this layout of Jerusalem here, with a small Antonia and a big temple mount, is the unlikely scenario, while this is, due to the requirements the fortress had, as well as the considerations of King Herod. Now, the next time I will discuss this matter from an archaeological perspective, and I will thank you for listening.